Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. For those new here, my name is Jake, and I used to give weekly product design tutorials, but I have been slacking a lot recently, and I swear there's been good reason for that. The short of it is I actually left my old job a few months ago, took some time off altogether, just needed a break. So yeah, I took a few months off. One of those I was able to take completely off and travel a bit, but after that it was kind of back to the grind, like I need to figure out next steps. Had some ideas, had some options, but I was kind of deciding between a startup gig and going back to the agency space or working in-house. Ultimately ended up interviewing at a bunch of different places. A few of these companies actually made me complete take-home assessments as part of the interview screening process, which I have my own opinions about, but one of them was a pretty cool assignment, which I'm going to be sharing and walking through today with you guys. Fun fact, I actually ended up getting an offer from this company. Didn't end up accepting it. I actually ended up joining another agency called YML. I'll link their website in the description if you guys want to go check it out. Shameless plug. Really awesome place, really happy here. But I think in sharing my process, hopefully it helps you guys if you guys ever come across any take-home assignment. It might even be beneficial when you're putting together a little case study of a project that you worked on. Maybe it's a personal project, maybe it's a professional project. But the way I sort of structured this is pretty similar to the way I would structure any sort of case study. So the last time I shared a full case study on this channel, you guys seem to really appreciate it. So hopefully this is helpful and inspires you. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the comment section below or shoot me an email at jpdesignacademy@gmail.com and I'll be happy to answer your questions. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so here we're looking at the project brief. So this was the actual design test prompt that I received. And just for some context, this was technically the second of 4 total interview stages. And this came after an initial screening interview I had with some members of the recruiting team, in which I talked about some of my past experience. I walked through a few projects, and I basically just told them like what I'm looking for in this next role and why I'm choosing this company and how I see myself sort of adding value to this agency. I don't know if I said this already, this is for a senior product designer position at a digital product design agency. So I was a little bit surprised that I needed to, in addition to walking through some of my portfolio projects, also do a take-home assignment. I think that's a little much to ask of designers, especially considering, most people who are interviewing for new roles are currently working full-time jobs. In my case, I was doing that in addition to freelancing for a startup here in LA. So I was already working like 80 hours a week, and it was kind of like the last thing I wanted to hear, that I needed to do another take-home assignment. This was after, spending the last month or so, like getting my portfolio up to date, building the whole thing in Webflow. It was just like a really crazy, hectic time period, but I was really interested in this company. So I was, in my mind, gonna do whatever it took at this point of the game. Just for some context on the brief itself, they said spend no more than 8 to 10 hours on it, which was kind of weird because they said that, but the actual assignment wasn't due for like another week. So there's always going to be that temptation to just take the whole week to like really polish this and make sure it's good to go. And in my mind, I'm also thinking this is probably what other candidates are doing competing for this role. So this is why I'm not the biggest fan of these take-home assignments for that very reason. But in any case, I dove right in. So here's the prompt, essentially. It was centered around mental health in the workplace. I'll try not to read this entire thing so I can actually just show you how I approached it, but here's the initial how might we question that I received. As we commit ourselves to meaningful endeavors in the workplace, how might we make sure that we're actively tracking our thoughts and moods to help promote and maintain good mental health? So there's already assumption that tracking your thoughts and moods does promote good mental health. So that was sort of an assumption that I didn't look too much into. I just assumed that, we'd already determined this. And then they said, how could this practice be made more accessible for people in the workplace? So specific to the workplace, right? For example, many find journaling a good way to expressively examine and document what thoughts might occupy them at a given time, both good and bad. What are some ways in which people can document their thoughts without it feeling too repetitive or task-based, or share things that they've learned with those around them? How might this tool offer guidance or support without feeling obtrusive? Then they listed some specs and features, so they wanted me to design this solution on a mobile device with a resolution of 375 by 812 in either portrait or landscape. So this was good to hear because, in doing some research around these take-home assignments prior to diving into this one, I came across some prompts that try to steer you more in the direction of like end-to-end service design, or where part of your job as the designer is figuring out what type of solution you're actually designing. So it's not always going to be a mobile app. It's not always going to be a mobile website. It could be a Google Doc. It could be like pen and paper. Like who knows if the solution is the best solution for solving this specific problem. But in this case, they tell you it's going to be some sort of digital solution. And also like just knowing what this company does. They're a digital product design agency, and they pretty much specialize in mobile app design. So I sort of knew they would want me to go in that direction, but it was just good to hear them list this screen resolution, which is what is this? This is the iPhone 11, not the Max, but it's the regular. But yeah, then they say they want me to show my whole process. So all my process of capturing, measuring, sharing insights, as well as any follow-up activities you see benefiting this experience. Consider the technologies that might support this experience, and also think in terms of flows rather than isolated screens. That's something I pretty much do anyway. I'm really big on thinking in terms of flows rather than static screens. I don't think anything should be static. You're never really looking at a screen in isolation these days. And yeah, here they say like what we're looking for, and they encourage me to share my entire process, like how I got here, what assumptions, research, and what my ideation phase looked like, which, you know, is already asking a pretty decent amount to do in 8 to 10 hours. Because normally if you're doing research, I would say you have anywhere from 4 weeks to like 3 months to do a whole research and discovery phase. And here we're giving 8 to 10 hours to do everything end to end. So, I mean, how much insightful research could I actually do in this time period? Well, I'll kind of show you how I approached that. But then part 2 was more or less like, you know, why I made these visual design choices. So this was really, they really wanted to see like UX and UI approach here. And then this was important to me anyway, because as you guys know, like I'm really big on UI motion and using motion to tell stories and really bring your ideas to life. So I really wanted to make sure I had enough time to get here. I also been doing some preliminary research on this company, and they're really big on being able to animate a flow. Like that's what they look for in candidates. So I figured if I could get to that point, I'd be in a really good place. So here's the presentation template they gave me. So they basically told me to copy this into a Dropbox paper file and approach it that way. So that was kind of nice. I didn't really have to think about how to actually present this. They sort of just gave me a template to use. So here we are in Dropbox paper. This is what I actually did my assignment in. I had actually never used this tool before, but it's kind of like Google Docs. I don't really know why I had to use this, but whatever. So here's the name of my project. I named it Felix. You'll see why. But essentially the idea behind it is it's a workplace AI companion who looks out for your mental health. I listed some project tags here, and not something I had to do, but I think this kind of gives an oversight of some of the technologies that I'd be exploring. And here's some of the tools I used. All right, so now let's take a look at my process, and I'll try to keep this somewhat brief. I felt it was necessary to reiterate, like, given the fact that I only have 10 hours to do this, like I have to be really methodical and efficient in my discovery phase. So the name of the game here for me was doing just enough research to influence my design decision. I wanted to show this company that I'm not just jumping right into screen design. I'm really thinking about the problem space. I'm thinking about our users and their goals and their wants and their needs, looking into the competitive landscape, right? All these activities that happen a bit further upstream in the design process. If you guys are familiar with the double diamond design model, that's sort of what I followed here as a framework, right? Where there's sort of 2 diamonds. There's the experience strategy that happens first, right? It's designing the right thing. Then there's that second diamond, which is designing things right. So this is all happening kind of further upstream in that first diamond. And I'll link a really great article on this subject below. I'm also probably going to make a whole separate video on the concept of convergent and divergent design and the double diamond model. I think it's just like a really great framework. I'm not saying it's a framework you should follow, but it's one that I more or less followed here without explicitly saying I'm following the double diamond model. But I digress. So I came up with some research goals. Number 1 was to learn as much as possible about our potential users, right? So who would actually use a product like this? What are their pain points, needs, wants, and goals? To what extent do demographics, seniority level, industry, organization size, and structure play a role, right? So like if I'm a female working at a startup in Silicon Valley versus if I'm a male working at an investment bank in New York, how do these factors play a role in my overall health and well-being, right? If I'm a junior employee versus senior employee, right? How do these play a role? So just learning as much as possible about our potential users and potential like workplace dynamics that might exist. Number 2 is understanding some of the current solutions in the competitive landscape, right? So like what exists today? What digital and physical methods exist for tracking your thoughts and moods? And more specifically, are any of these tools workplace specific, right? Like I kind of knew off the bat, if I were to go into the App Store right now and type in thought tracking app or something along those lines, I could find a bunch of results. But how many of these are specific to the workplace? So these are some areas that I wanted to explore. Also, what type of digital solution is desired and what makes the most sense? So is it a native app? Is it a website? Is it a web app? Is it an API integration, right? Is it some sort of integration with a current app that exists. Number 4, determine if and how we can leverage technology and innovation, right? So this kind of came directly from the prompt. So I wanted to see if there's any technology that we can implement, not just for the sake of implementing, but for the sake of actually improving the user's experience, whether this was simplifying tasks for them or delighting them, reducing friction or any manual work. So given the time frame, again, I knew I wouldn't have time to sit down with users and interview them one-on-one. Although I guess worth noting here is I was able to leverage my mom and my younger brother. My mom actually works for NAMI, which is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So it would have been kind of stupid of me to not use her as a resource for a project centered around mental health. So she was great. I was able to talk with her on the phone, just get some insights. And my younger brother had actually tried some of these competitor apps, so I was able to talk to him. But other than that, I use Google Forms as my main way of collecting some qualitative data. So I'll just show you some of the questions I asked. So here's the actual form that I blasted to a bunch of Facebook groups and Slack groups that I'm in. So this top half is more demographic information, right? Like what is your occupation? What's your industry? Where do you live? How would you describe your career level? And then this bottom half is more open-ended. So I was really just trying to gain as much qualitative insight as possible. So if you guys want to pause the video, you could take a look at some of the questions I was asking. So here you can see the response breakdown. And as you see, I got 11 responses, which isn't a ton, but I felt it was enough for me to move forward. 7 different industries, 62% male, 38% female, 57% in-house or startup, 28% agency or professional services, 14% freelance independent. So I got some variation. I will say this demographic data was probably somewhat skewed because a lot of these Facebook and Slack groups I'm in are sort of like tech focused, like they're like design and development groups that I'm in. But I had to work with what I had. So I even said this when I was presenting this to this company. I was like, this is probably not too accurate, but again, just doing what I can here, given the time frame. And then from those responses, I was able to sort of organize the responses into common themes and patterns. So I'll just show you some of the insights that I gathered. So in bold are the insights, and then italicized here are the actual responses. So it's that idea of synthesis, right? So we went wide, now we're kind of going narrow. We're organizing all of this unstructured research findings into structured themes and insights. So number 1, employees value time and convenience. Number 2, emphasis on employee well-being varies based on industry and org structure. So for example, like this person worked at a big tech company. There's a lot of smoke and mirror stuff at my company around putting people first when in reality, nobody really cares about you and you're just a number affecting the bottom line. So yeah, that was pretty powerful to hear. Something I had actually experienced personally working at a very large company prior in my career. Number 3, current mood and thought tracking apps and methods are repetitive, impersonal, and fail to offer practical solutions. Like for example, this person said, many of these apps are great for journaling, but don't actually provide solutions that you don't already know. Like obviously sleep and exercise are important. You don't need to tell me that. Number 4, employees feel better when given the chance to talk with others about what they're going through, both good and bad. They appreciate being heard. This is a pretty funny response. This person was like, I like to commiserate with others on my team when things are really bad. We joke around, but it actually helps knowing that I'm not alone. This is actually someone I had talked to the week prior. I was asking a friend of mine about their new gig that they just started, and they absolutely hated it. And they were just like jokingly to me saying, even just talking to you has made me feel better. Damn, I need to reevaluate my life. So this idea of like talking to others, appreciating being heard was a theme that I found. Number 5, planning ahead can help reduce stress and dissatisfaction in the workplace. So for example, this person said, I've learned to set boundaries and block off time for myself. I also used to hoard my PTO hours, but now I use them whenever I need a break. Another one, I hate having to sit through meetings that don't matter, especially when I have actual work to do. I feel like I'm constantly crunched for time. The key takeaway here is basically we had all these unstructured research findings that I tried to organize into common themes and patterns. So again, we went wide, now we're going narrow. We diverged, now we're converging. So again, more synthesis here, synthesizing all of these research findings into a single persona. I probably could have broken this out into multiple personas, but given the time frame, I just wanted to focus on one specific user and their needs and their goals. So in this case, it's just like a fictional representation of all our research findings. I named it Danny Phantom, like the show. In this case, he's a product designer working in Silicon Valley. So I gave a quote, gave some pain points and concerns, and some of the goals and interests. So basically anything I'd be designing would sort of be designing for this user in mind. That was the goal here. Did some competitive analysis. Some of these competitors I learned about from my surveys. Some I just learned on my own by going to the App Store, typing in things like thought tracking apps or doing Google searches. So yeah, like Reflectly, Journify, Voice Memos were some competitors that came up. Just listed some pros and cons. Some of these pros and cons were from people from the surveys, and some were just like my own findings. One other thing I noticed kind of coincidentally during the week I was doing this was that Slackbot, which is like Slack's like kind of like AI companion tool. In one of these Slack groups I'm in, Slackbot was saying, "Happy Monday, everyone. As we kick off the week, does anyone want to set any intentions for what they'd like to accomplish today, tomorrow, and the week ahead?" And then people within the Slack group are sort of responding. So it's this idea of encouraging people to share how they're feeling about the upcoming week. I thought that was very interesting and actually tied back to that whole theme I found in my research, in my survey research, where people were saying they enjoy being able to talk about what they're going through. And this was just coming from some sort of AI tool. It wasn't like a person within their organization. So that theme I felt was really interesting. Also, another thing that came out of my research was people didn't want yet another workplace tool, right? Like they already have all these apps, like you have your Outlook and you have your Slack and you have your calendar apps, like you have all these workplace tools. They didn't want yet another tool on top of their already crazy workplace application suite of tools. So figuring out a way to maybe weave this into their current work environment, I think was something worth exploring. And maybe some sort of integration with Slack could be something worth exploring. And that's actually kind of the direction I headed in. But it was just cool to coincidentally see this while I was conducting research for this project. Then based on all my research, I sort of redefined the problem. So essentially, busy working professionals need a personalized, convenient, and empowering way to track their moods, thoughts, and feelings in order to reduce the risk of burning out and negatively affecting their well-being. So it's sort of like the who, the what, like what do they need, and the why, right? Why do they need it? Something I always like to do is sort of tie everything back to some experience pillars. So this experience needs to be personal, it needs to be convenient and empowering, were the three I sort of learned from my research. Then taking these experience pillars and coming up with some features. So some of these features were requested, some of these features were just based on the technology that exists today and how it might support the user's needs. I sort of organized them in this sense. Another way you could do this is just like write some user stories, which probably would have been better, but yeah, that's just what I did. So then I came up with a little low fidelity flow. So I came up with some wireframes. Now, full disclosure, in my normal everyday design process, on my current design team, I would never really do this stage in terms of creating digital wireframes. It's not something I really do too often. Like normally I'll come up with like a little task flow. I'll sketch on pen and paper or on a whiteboard, but then I'll probably take those and just jump right into high fidelity. But in this case, since the client specifically asked for sketches and wireframes, I felt like just adding some digital wireframes couldn't hurt here. Also because my sketches are so sloppy, like my pen and paper sketches, for presentation purposes, it felt a little more polished to me to like add this stage. But yeah, just full disclosure here, it's not something I usually do, especially if I'm working within like a design language already, like a design system. There's really no need a lot of the times to do this stage, but in any case, I'll just walk you through the flow here. So the idea was you get a notification from Slack. So again, it's this idea of this all being integrated within your current work environment. So that we don't have to introduce yet another form of notification, right? And I also was hypothesizing that since in the workplace, you're probably spending all your time in Slack anyway, you're probably more inclined to check a Slack notification than a notification from yet another app to bring you into this check-in flow. So that's the idea here. The entry point is Slack. You get a notification to check in. Felix, that's the guy's name, spelled Feelix, right? Like feelings. So I felt Felix was a pretty clever name here. Not gonna lie. But anyway, he greets you saying, "Happy Monday, Danny, way to finish strong last week." So maybe you get like a check-in at the beginning of the week and maybe one at the end of the week. So here, pretend it's a Monday. You get a notification from Felix. "Happy Monday, Danny, way to finish strong last week. How are you feeling about the week ahead?" So you have this little slider that ranges from, amazing to awful. In this case, you're gonna slide it down. You're gonna select awful. Why are you feeling awful? You hold down to speak, right? Or you could tap to type, but in this case, we're demoing the voice angle here because again, tying back to the insights from the research, people enjoy talking to someone. So in this case, they're talking to this sort of like AI companion, but it's still this idea of talking, expressing how they're feeling. So in this case, I have a big deliverable on Friday. I'm worried that I won't have enough heads down design time because I have so many meetings scheduled. So you press continue. And then again, Felix is woven into your current work environment. So he understands your schedule, and he's also analyzing what you're telling him, and he's making a recommendation based on what you're telling him. So since you're most productive in the morning, would you like me to try to move your Tuesday stand-up with Dev from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m.? So he pulls up your calendar so you can have a view of your current schedule. And you could say, yes, let's propose a new time. And then Felix is going to propose a new time on your behalf. He's going to ask, is there anything else in your mind? You say, nope, not at the moment. You get a little summary screen. And then you get to view your check-in here, your newest check-in, with the ability to play back the voice part. And you also get some predictive insights here. So Felix, based on what you told him, is sort of analyzing your week ahead. And since you told him you have a big presentation on Friday, he's saying your week is going to peak in severity on Thursday. So you get this visualization. Another thing that influenced this visualization here was users saying they usually feel better well-being wise if they have an understanding of their week ahead and they have time to prepare, so they're not as stressed out and cramming all the time. So this little visualization could potentially help users, prepare for the week ahead. And I'll show you the motion flow of like what this all looks like in high fidelity, but that's like the overall theme here. Again, I listed some assumptions, right? Like we're assuming Danny's already been onboarding. He's synced his Slack and Office 365 accounts for more personalized support from Felix. And also we're assuming that this is not his first time submitting with Felix, because Felix has the ability now to not only look at what you're telling him in real time, but also assess your past check-ins and your past behaviors to make a solid recommendation. So there's sort of like the AI machine learning angle of this. So then I started diving into like the actual brand and visual design challenge. So I just came up with some how might we's, like how might we make a workplace tool with complex technology like AI feel friendly and personal? How might we minimize cognitive load and unnecessarily UI elements, add meaningful and intuitive interactions, and also create wow moments and delight the user? So that was my process. And then I actually started moving into visual design, which actually took more time, believe it or not, than the whole discovery piece. Because when you think about it, most of my research and discovery was passive, right? Like I had to kind of come up with my research approach. But after that, it was more or less just blasting to a bunch of Slack and Facebook groups and kind of waiting for people to respond to my surveys. But overall, kept things very simple. Chose one main color, an accent color, and some status colors. For typography, I chose Ephra, which is an Adobe font. It's a humanist sans serif, which I felt was a really good choice here because I really wanted to personify Felix and make him feel, human and relatable. So this font has a bit of humanity to it, if you will. It's also really easy to read. But overall, very simple brand visual identity here for a few reasons, mainly because I didn't have a ton of time to dive into a Viz ID here, but also, this is really just an exchange between you and Felix, at least the flow I'm choosing to demo here. So everything else should sort of get out of the way. I really wanted this to feel very simple and minimal and just focus on the flow between you and Felix. So I actually thought this ID worked really well. Used some feather icons here, didn't do any custom icon work. But yeah, here are the screens in high fidelity. So here's sort of how I was envisioning that Slack entry point, right? So you'd get a notification from Felix, which is like a Slack app. And here you see some of the past check-in notifications from Felix, which are a little different than like a regular Slack bot notification, right? Let's see, for example, in this case, he's saying, is there anything you'd like to get off your chest about this past week? Your sleep schedule was a little different than normal. So in this particular one, we're assuming maybe he's integrated a wearable. I didn't actually design that part, but some stuff we could potentially do in the future. Or here you're saying, I hope you enjoyed your weekend and made an effort to relax like we discussed. How are you feeling about the week ahead, right? So they're a little more personal, a little more relatable. It feels like he's really looking out for you. He has your best interests in mind. So that's where I was going with this. So this newest notification, he's saying, good morning, Danny. I'd love to know how you're feeling about the week ahead, or if there's anything I can help, or if there's anything I can do to help, check in now. And we discuss kind of what that experience is like. But again, here's personifying Felix, right? As you slide on the slider, his facial expressions change. Here you're saying why are you feeling awful? You're getting some voice feedback. So basically as you're pressing down, you're getting this ripple effect happening. I actually did this part in After Effects. I didn't do that in Figma. Here's what the calendar looks like. And here's the summary screen. You told Felix that you're feeling awful, so hence the teardrop. he reflects kind of your mood. Again, using these status colors to sort of draw attention and show the severity. We have this gradation. So as you see, it's more red where your week is more severe in terms of intensity. So it's a nice visualization to the user to show like, okay, maybe I should like prepare a little bit more midweek so I'm not so crazed on Thursday. And here are some of the past check-ins. So once all the visual design was complete, I brought everything into After Effects to prototype this because I knew there were some certain things that I really wanted to do that I just wouldn't be able to do in an interactive prototyping tool like Principle or InVision Studio, specifically around how to personify Felix. And I'll show you how to do that. But yeah, basically my goal through the motion design, and I said that right here, is I wanted a user to feel like they were talking to a friend, not just an abstract AI bot. And even though this is just a motion sketch, I tried to show how he squishes and stretches as he enters and exits the viewport. You see how the screens kind of seamlessly transition from one to the next. So this feels like really fluid, or at least that was my goal, to make this feel very fluid and engaging. And yeah, just like playing with the timing of how things enter and exit the screen, making this experience feel very reactive to your input, which in my mind usually gives the user a sense of control, which usually benefits their experience. So I'm gonna just play the actual render rather than playing it inside of Dropbox because the quality is a little better. But yeah, I'll kind of be talking as you watch this flow. So basically we start inside of Slack, we get a notification from Felix saying it's time to check in. We hit check in now, brings you into the Felix experience. Welcome back, Danny. Way to finish strong last week. So he kind of remembers what happened last week. He's going to transition into this little slider here. I didn't have time to animate his facial expressions, but you basically select how you're feeling overall about the week ahead. You're saying you're feeling awful. Why are you feeling awful? Tap to type, hold to speak. In this case, we're going to hold to speak. I have a big deliverable on Friday. I'm worried that I won't have enough heads down time because I have so many meetings scheduled. Hit continue. He's going to draw out your key words that he's going to assess. So like based on what you just told him and based on your past check-ins with Felix, he's going to make a recommendation. So since you're most productive in the morning, would you like me to try to move your Tuesday stand-up with Deb from 9 a.m. to 1? You hit yes. He's going to propose a new time on your behalf. Is there anything else in your mind? So it's really conversational. You hit no. Here's the summary of everything you just told him, and you're going to complete the check-in. That's going to bring you to this check-in screen. Now, I ended the experience there, so I really just focused on the entry point and then the check-in flow. I didn't really do a whole, IA assessment of what this entire application would look like. Of course, there would probably be like a profile screen somewhere. Actually, I could kind of show you some other explorations I did. So here's in Figma, like I was exploring like maybe what a profile screen would look like, or maybe what. Maybe you break this down even further, saying like, when I'm feeling awful, I'm averaging 6 hours and 23 minutes of sleep, or I'm averaging 4 meetings per day. So you get even more insight into kind of, what sets you off, or like, when you're feeling good, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. When I'm feeling bad, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I didn't go that deep into this though. Like I could have gone with the whole wearable angle, but I just like didn't get that far. But yeah, just some other explorations, mostly just focused on that check-in flow. But yeah, hopefully, I thought that tells the story pretty well. I'll play it through one more time. And if this is something you guys are interested in learning, like how to actually animate this or something similar to this inside of After Effects, I'm more than happy to dive into the nitty gritty. But yeah, that's definitely a topic for another video. But I thought this was a pretty delightful little experience here. Especially compared to a lot of the other competitors that I looked into. It felt a lot more engaging, and this AI angle I think is really cool because I'm not just like selecting inputs after input after input. It's all conversational. So like you could basically tell Felix anything and he could potentially make a recommendation based on anything you told him. Now, of course, he's not always going to be able to recommend something based on your calendar. That was very unique to the specific input that you gave him. But even if he's not able to sort of make a really intelligent recommendation based on your workplace environment, at the very least, you're still checking in with Felix, which I still felt was a pretty valuable experience. But yeah, that's more or less the experience, and then I just ended with some final thoughts. This is actually something they asked me to do, but it was basically me saying with more time, I would do all this stuff. So I would test my flow with users, I would iterate based on any feedback. I would look into the architecture as a whole, since I only designed one very specific flow. Explore other visual directions. There'd probably be some sort of onboarding flow where you basically tell Felix some of your tendencies. Maybe you tell him what kind of sets you off, what helps your mental health, stuff like that in the beginning. But again, just didn't have time. I would really dial in the physics. I thought I did okay on that motion flow, but I could spend hours really dialing in some of the motion stuff. Explore where you can add more physical touches, maybe opportunities to add haptics and other ways to use the sensor of the phone. Refine the character illustrations, systematize the designs. This is a big one. I didn't really assess the feasibility of any of this stuff. I don't even know if the technology is really here yet to do something like this. I'm sure it probably is if you hire the right people. I'm sure this is possible. If not now, then sometime in the near future. But I'd really have to look into some of the feasibility and what this Slack integration would really look like and what it would cost. But yeah, it was a bit outside of the scope of this deliverable. So yeah, guys, I'm gonna wrap the video here. Hopefully that was really helpful. If you guys learned something, I'd really appreciate it if you gave a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel and helps more people view my content. Drop any comments or questions below. If there's anything you would have done differently, I'd also, I'm open to feedback, always trying to grow as a designer. I do not have all the answers by any means. I'm still trying to figure this out as I go. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. So thanks again for listening to me rant, and catch you in the next one.